Welcome to Popcorn Planet. I am Andy Signore. We're still live, but I wanted to clip a second part of this because I found this very important in this Alec Baldwin Rust tragedy debate. He did a big interview. We've been discussing it with attorney Christopher Melcher and actor Adam Baldwin. I've been very lucky to have them both here offering their insight. We talked a lot about whether this was, helped or hurt him. I think we've all deemed that it has not helped him. We'll see if it hurts. It seems like it could. But the next big question is this sort of defense that he's put out there of like, well, I didn't pull the trigger. And a lot of people are having a lot of trouble with this. And Christopher, you alerted me to this clip, and I know you both have thoughts, but I thought let's just watch the first 30 seconds of this because they brought on an expert who actually just pulls out the weapon and shows you how ridiculous this excuse is.
So the gun. And this is one of the big headlines from this interview. Alec Baldwin made the claim that he never pulled the trigger, that what he did was he pulled the hammer back and then released it. Explain to us
exactly what happened.
Okay, explain to me what he's claiming and how plausible that is.
Okay, so not plausible. On a single action revolver, when you pull the hammer back, which is an intentional act, click, 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 click. Now the hammer is set. When you pull the hammer back and let go, as you can see, I'm not holding this, the hammer doesn't go anywhere. When you press the trigger, which is, I'm going to do it with this finger so you can see what a minute act that is. It takes very little to press the trigger there. So option one, he pressed the trigger, but it was such a minor press that he wasn't aware that he had, ordered that signal from his brain. Or option B, he's holding the gun with the trigger depressed. Now, on this gun, it doesn't matter which order you go in. You can either cock the gun and you can fire it with the trigger, or you can press the trigger and then cock the gun, and if you release it at this point, it falls and the gun fires. So if, as he is cross-drawing, his finger is on the trigger, which he may have interpreted as just resting on the trigger, but with a 1 millimeter pull, that would be sufficient. Now he pulls the hammer back and then releases it. He doesn't have to press the trigger again if he's already got pressure on it in order for the gun to fire. And I think that's really a key point in this matter.
It's super key. When you see that happening, and thanks for sharing that with me, Christopher, when you see that, it's just like, well, what the hell is he sort of implying? I mean, they go on to explain that the only other option is to maybe go through the parts of the gun to see if there really was some sort of faulty thing, which would be easy to figure out. I know you're a weapons expert too, Chris, that would be easy to figure out if there was something faulty in that weapon. They would know pretty quickly.
Yeah, so the prosecution, if they do charge him or anyone else here, is going to do the same type of video with a weapons expert with the actual firearm that was used in this killing, and to demonstrate whether there was any defect in the firearm, so that when this hammer was cocked, could it just fall forward and hit the casing and the primer and with the firing pin and cause it to go off without your finger being on the trigger. So they would go through every which way of that to say, look, this gun was manufactured as intended. There was not modified. There was no defect, and we are demonstrating that this thing cannot go off without a finger on the trigger. And as this expert is showing here, that Alec's finger was probably already on the trigger when he cocked the gun. And with that particular firearm, once you finish double cocking it, if your finger's on the trigger, it's going to go off. And that's what we've seen with people who are handed a firearm who are not experienced. They typically will put their finger in the trigger guard on the trigger. It's just commonly happens because they don't know what they're doing. Rather than having it alongside the firearm, they're going to put the finger on the trigger. And my guess is that's where his finger was when he cocked it, and that's why he was surprised when it went off. But he violated multiple safety rules, pretty much every one of them. But first of all, is keep your finger off the trigger. And second of all, you have to assume that firearm is loaded until you physically and visually inspected that it's not.
Yeah, and Adam, we have you on as well. You've done a lot of movies. You handle a lot of weapons. You seem to know your firearms pretty well. What is your response to this when you see this and Alec trying to say, well, and not even just Alec, it's actually the assistant director is also now coming out. It seems like they're all sort of joining a defense in a way to sort of cover themselves of he's saying, I didn't see Alec pull the trigger of that fired either. I don't even know how how close he could have been to even notice that. But Adam, what do you think when you see this?
I'd like to return to the SAG safety bulletin from the National Stunt and Safety Department, which says anyone handling a weapon shall receive the proper training and know all operating features and safety devices. Property master and or weapons handler must meet with the cast and crew and inform them of the safety precautions in effect and answer any questions. He says in his interview with Stephanopoulos that he had that meeting with the armorer when he got there. Now, if he had any further questions, it was his responsibility to ask, well, is it really this safe? Oh, it's really not that safe. I'd better be more careful with that. He didn't do that.
Well, especially since there have been previous discharges on that set as well, which he tries to gloss over in the interview, which is very also frustrating. He's like, no accidents happened here, except for those, other discharges, but, not in my purview.
That's beside the point. He admits that he met with her for a safety meeting, so she fulfilled her requirements for that.
Unless her safety meeting sucked, right?
But it's up to him. Again, in the safety protocols, SAG-AFTRA, that's not her. IATSE has its own. She's under IATSE, I presume. She has her own safety protocols, which she followed by having that meeting with him. He still has the SAG-AFTRA protocols and regulations that require him to be as familiar and safe with the safety measures, safety systems of the weapon himself before going any further.
Well, would those safety guidelines would say don't ever aim it, even because his whole excuse was, and I'm curious from an acting standpoint, he's like, because Stephanopoulos presses, right? He goes, well, you're never supposed to point a gun ever, and he's like, well, unless the director of photography is telling you to line up the shot, and he's claiming that, and he's also saying my hand wasn't on the trigger. What is your response to that?
Well, again, let's talk about his specific weapon. He is required to know the specific safety mechanisms of that specific weapon in his hand. He's supposed to be trained with it. He's required to be trained with it. So he clearly didn't do that, or he was negligent in the operation of that weapon. Him claiming that the cinematographer was directing him to do it is contradicted. He has inconsistencies all over the map in his interview. He says this is the most beautiful collaborative effort. It wasn't her telling him what to do. It was the two of them collaborating together in that act. He was responsible for the gun, not the cinematographer. She was telling him what to do, but he was collaborating with her to create the shot. He's the star of the show. He's got an executive producer credit. He's one of the bosses. She's not telling him what to do. They're collaborating for the shot.
Yeah, and I know Christopher's got to run out. So, Christopher, thank you for being here. I know you got to go, but hit your meeting. I'll finish up with Adam here. But thank you so much for being here. And thanks so much, as always. Always a pleasure to have you, sir.
Any last words, Christopher?
I think he was. I lost past one, but I would have loved to have his words. But it does seem like he agrees this is not going to help Alec in the slightest moving forward in this case. He did tell us that in the previous video, which you can check out in our previous conversation. But yeah, I mean, Alec clearly opened up a can of worms here that I think he's going to regret. I mean, it's a very, actory thing to do, though, want to sort of clear your name. Do you sense, and do you feel any empathy for him or in any way? Or did you believe any of it at all, Adam?
I was just having this conversation with my wife. Imagine if it had not been Alec that did this, but Adam that did this. I would be devastated. I would have, first of all, it would never happen because I'm very proficient with firearms and I make sure that they're safe. Secondly, but hypothetically speaking, had I done this, I would be devastated and I would cop to it. I would say, I did that. Now, obviously, that's why this whole fast reaction PR team that's spun up to attack Hannah Gutierrez is so enraging, because they went after her instead of him stepping up and saying, you know what, there were a lot of mistakes made, but ultimately it falls to me. I'm the lead actor. I'm holding the gun. I aimed it. I pressed the trigger, or I dropped the hammer. I did that, and it caused her to die, and it caused my friend to be shot. And for him to point fingers elsewhere is despicable.
Yeah, I mean, he really didn't take any accountability. It was something because he constantly was just trying to defend himself, and the constant thing he did of I'm not a victim, but was very just a weird thing that you'd think someone would have coached him on and be like, don't do that. Like
and what the hell is he doing bringing up Spielberg and Cruise? I mean, I bet they really appreciate him invoking their names.
Well, when I appreciated Stephanopoulos for actually pressuring and asking the questions, and he did, to his credit. And that moment where he sort of brings up.
But why did Stephanopoulos or his team provide him with the safety bulletins, the protocols, the New Mexico law? Why weren't those
that's
brought
fair.
up?
That could have been. They could have been harsher in that regard now, because I'm still ignorant to that. So I appreciate you alerting us to that. But even like when Stephanopoulos points out, like people like Clooney who were very vocal, basically calling Alec an idiot, and he effed up. This
stuff has all been available online. This is a big news organization. They have a huge research department with a multi-million-dollar budget. They couldn't find these little protocols that are just right there on the website.
No, because so do you think there's a cover up in this? I mean, because it's interesting too to see. What do you think when you see assistant director saying he didn't see the pull the trigger? Like, do you believe that?
There's no cover up, but what it is journalistic malpractice. It's lazy journalists that aren't doing their freaking job.
Well said.
Why would they? But why would they not be doing their job? Why wouldn't they be doing that? Because perhaps they agree. And they brought this up. See, again, it's not political. This is firearm safety. And why did Stephanopoulos bring up this Trump thing? Well, guilt by association. Well, anybody that's criticizing Alec for shooting his cinematographer is clearly a Trumper. Well, bullshit. It's just this simpatico that they may have politically, which has nothing to do with this. It's a dodge.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like what Trump said. I don't think it was relevant to what we were doing.
But
that doesn't matter. Like, why bring it up?
It doesn't matter.
It's distracting from your point of exactly. If it's distracting from the fact of like this isn't what this is about. And if we start talking about the salacious, what the Trumps are saying, we're losing focus on what the real issues are. And you're right. Stephanopoulos should have pressed further. Well, wait, we have the guidelines right here. Let's talk about that safety training you do. Did she, tell me what she went, he could have deposed him right then and there and actually caught him had he been a proper journalist. But I'm sure they're friends, and I'm sure he was trying to be like they do in Hollywood a lot. He's trying to be hard, but not too hard. You know what I mean? Because he wants to interview the next guy. And that's the sad reality of how the media works.
I will say in Stephanopoulos' defense, he's clearly, he's from the Clinton war room, so we know where his allegiances lie politically. That's beside the point. His team didn't give him this information. I think he would have brought it up had his team provided it to him. He's a busy guy. I get that. But it's still he's conducting the interview. I think he did a pretty good job for the most part, just leading Alec on to the point where Alec, for all intents and purposes, confessed to discharging the weapon negligently. So, right. That's the headline of the whole interview, as far as I'm concerned. All the rest of it is fluff.
Yeah, I mean, and when I see this clip too, as well, it's like I don't believe he wasn't. I mean, I guess I'll apologize if I'm wrong, but the odds of this gun being off seems very unlikely to me, and it seems like they would have said it already, because they could have easily taken this gun apart, and they've had weeks to decipher, yes, this was a faulty gun, in which case that would have put this whole thing to rest, and we could have all been stopped. We wouldn't even need an investigation. I mean, we would. Why was there a live round still? But a gun malfunction.
That's a separate issue.
Exactly, but gun malfunction would have put this all to bed if everyone could have proven that. Did you agree?
No, because you can't presume that the gun will be functioning 100% when you're pointing it at someone.
Also part of the guidelines, I imagine.
That's right.
Which he wasn't privy to, and the other thing
he was privy to.
Well, right, but he's in his mind, he clearly wasn't paying attention, because he even sort of says, like, at one point he changes his tune. He's like, "Well, do you feel responsible?" And he's like, "Well." Or what's an actor's responsibility was what the quote was, right? It was like, well, what is the actor's responsibility? And he sort of paused. He's like, well, I guess it's different now. And I remember seeing that. I'm like, well, no, it wasn't that way for George Clooney. It wasn't that way for Adam Baldwin. It wasn't that way. You guys aren't even anywhere. It's not, again, not even politics. Two people, complete professionals in this world, both had the wherewithal to realize, no, you don't ever just take a gun. And even if it said it's cold, you see it with your own eyes to ensure Brandon Lee doesn't happen again. This isn't the first time it's happened, right?
The arrogance of him when Stephanopoulos brought up Clooney. He clearly he doesn't want to go to war with George Clooney because he'll lose that war. But then he shifts to, well, there are certain people that brought certain things up, and I discount most of them, but there were a couple that are important to me. He's making a big mistake going to war with those people. And it was surprising to me to see CNN with that demonstration that you showed earlier. It appears to me that his normal allies on CNN are turning because they see the facts. It's not about politics. It's about, we don't want this to happen on our movie sets ever because you're not following the guidelines. You're not following the rules. Brandon Lee died 2 decades ago, and I was in the business when that happened, or more. And we don't ever want to see that happen again. And here it is happening again with, coincidentally, an anti-gun zealot. And that's irony, but we don't want this to happen again. I mean, poor Halyna Hutchins, the suffering, the people that witnessed it, her family. It's just, I can see why he was crying because it is tragic. He didn't do it on purpose, but he did it, and he admitted to it.
Yeah, he can still admit it, but still have then express how did this get in there and have more anger.
Well, think of Shawshank Redemption when Red, the Morgan Freeman character, is in front of the parole board. He said, "I want to go back to that dumb kid and talk to him." This is kind of his Morgan Freeman speech from Shawshank Redemption. It's like, I want to go back to that. Although that was a deliberate act, it echoes that.
Yeah, there's a lot to digest here. I appreciate your insight in here. Stick around for another minute as we wrap up, but I want to trim this portion so we can upload this later. If you guys want to follow out Adam Baldwin, you can find him over on Twitter. Anything else you want to plug or mention?
No, I'm just here to talk about this for some clarity's sake.
I appreciate it. If you guys are watching, you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for all alerts, and smash the like button to help the algorithm because Google doesn't like these stories when we have civil conversations about firearms or other things. So help get the word out there if you can. Share this video. Thank you for watching. If you're watching live, and Adam, don't go anywhere. Just putting this out there to wrap up this video. Appreciate you guys watching. I'm going to get through your comments in 2 seconds.